The whole idea of the project right from the beginning is unveiling, and I think that's kind of continued in this bit, where contents are usually hidden, we're making them aware, and that's kind of what happened in the first variation. And I think, this is like an extension of that, of like unboxing the black box of, what happens within digital space. I'd loosely kind of designed this, the sort of 4 chapters around 4 very particular themes. So the first was around the kind of contents that are usually hidden within the kind of shipping of these materials. Then the second is about the kind of unveiling of the processes. The third is around model collapse. And finally, the fourth is about how it's all stored. What we're doing here is trying to look at all of the different processes, labour, materials, and everything that went into V1, 2 and 3, and particularly focusing on V3, where everything is at the moment that's come together and that's sort of started to collapse and fall apart. How do you go from the kind of chaos of collapse to then the logic of an archive? And I think that's what I'm trying to do in this sort of process in between V3 and V4, trying to arrange and classify all of the items in the show to kind of build this archive. The opportunity arose to do that at Chemist as a sort of public-facing event, and so that's what I've chosen to do, rather than do it sort of behind closed doors, make it a sort of public archiving of the Variations project. I always had intended for V4 repository to be about a repository of the work, but also thinking about repository as a sort of place for storing knowledge as well. It will feel like somewhere between a sort of archive and a data centre as well, and it's really kind of trying to bring those two worlds together. The whole thing is about archiving both the digital and the physical and finding a way to understand those entanglements. I always worked with world building and trying to think about what the space of the installation should be. I've been really looking at the architecture of data centres, but also of art storage and archives, and noticing these material kind of mirrorings in those spaces. So just trying to find those material links that bridges the gap between those spaces. At the moment, I'm calling the system mapping, which feels like a kind of appropriate way of thinking about, both the digital mapping and the sort of broad geographic territory as well. So anything that's been involved in the project so far, we receive it, we log the artwork, we make notes, we sort of extract its features. So this is looking at the companies, the logistics, where it's come from and the different materials. One of the objects that we've just been categorising and archiving, for an example, is one of the 42 paintings that I made that was rephotographed to produce the sort of central photographic image in V3. Of course, we might look at the painting and think about the author as me, so we might assign it, my name. There were also paints that were used, and we traced that to look at where those paints are made. And actually, there are 2 spaces where the company kind of run their warehouses and where the paint is made. One is in the UK and one is in the Dominican Republic. Then I looked at the surface that's painted on at IKEA sort of mirror tiles that are made in China. So already we just have, we have this kind of global trail. Audience interaction has been, really present in the first 2 variations, and that part of that is because there was an awareness of data being collected and of photographs being collected. So as soon as a camera is placed in front of you, of course there is some kind of participation from the audience. I think making this process public, it continues this idea of unveiling the system. When I embarked upon this project, the whole idea was to demystify images that are made using machine learning tools. Really hoping and thinking that the audience at V4 at Stills will be able to take a crate and look through and leaf through, because actually I think there's a frustration when it's somehow behind closed doors. I think, when I originally made this proposal, I talked about collage as being the kind of central method that I would use, partly because that's something I've used, throughout my practice as a way of collapsing space and time and, I suppose, different realms, which felt totally appropriate when trying to understand how the, geological and technological sort of meet. And essentially, this is, a project that's full of collage. It's full of kind of materials collapsing and building upon each other, but it's this kind of drawn out collage that has all of these different branches that come off it, and it isn't, they're not kind of framed within the image as you might expect. The thing that has developed that was particularly unexpected is inserting my own body into the work kind of more and more. The first time it made logical sense to place myself in the image was when I was recreating the images from V2, because the question that I hadn't considered before was, well, who reenacts it? The deeper I go into the project, the less I use AI, which is, quite interesting. And I think that's because the data has been produced and I have the images to then respond to. That's something that the work has done. It's kind of allowed a break-off system, or like an alternative AI that exists with one's own logic. We can train our own data. We don't need a machine to do it necessarily. And maybe it's about finding that kind of parallel world in which to do that. It's been great working with Photoworks and just continuing building on this project. It's a project that's also just collected people along the way, and having the kind of consistency, I think, of Photoworks right from the beginning, of curatorial support from all the different institutions along the way and others that have been involved in the project too. It's been a project that has sort of gathered voices and people and performers, and I think it's really evolved in a way that I couldn't have imagined.